We hadn't been at Jason's party for more than a minute before I knew something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, but it wasn't the usual buzz of music or chatter that hung over the room. It was Emily, my wife. She moved through the party like she owned it, chin high, steps deliberate, but not in the confident, natural way I'd admired countless times before. No, this was different. Calculated. Cold. I watched her slip through the crowd, her eyes darting, scanning the room as if she were looking for someone. She barely glanced at me, offering nothing more than a clipped, "Oh hey, you made it," before disappearing into the maze of people. The words hit me like a slap, hollow and dismissive. I wanted to write it off. Maybe she was just in a mood, or had already had a drink or two. But something about the way she carried herself made it impossible to shake. Still, I tried. I grabbed a beer from the kitchen and forced myself to relax, leaning against the counter as conversations and laughter swirled around me. Emily didn't have to be by my side the whole night. We were both adults. But her absence wasn't just physical, it was loud. It screamed at me from across the room, telling me I didn't belong in whatever world she was in tonight. As I made small talk with a couple of old friends, I couldn't stop my eyes from searching for her. It wasn't jealousy. It was something else. That sick, gnawing feeling you get when you know something's off but can't prove it yet. And then I saw her. She was across the living room, on the far side of the party. Her laugh carried over the noise, light and carefree, so real it twisted my gut. I knew that laugh. It was the laugh she saved for those rare moments of pure joy, like when we first started dating, or when we watched dumb comedies at home. Only this time, it wasn't meant for me. I squinted through the crowd to see who she was with. She was leaning into someone, almost draped over him, her hand brushing his shoulder in a way that felt too intimate for comfort. My stomach turned. I stepped forward for a clearer view, and that's when I saw his face. Nick. My twin brother. For a second, I couldn't process it. Nick and I share the same face, sure, but we couldn't be more different. I built my life with hard work, my career, my house, my marriage. Nick drifted through life like it owed him something, reckless and carefree. He'd never settled down. Never held a real job for long. He was the guy who lived for the moment, no matter how many bridges he burned along the way. And tonight, he was the center of Emily's attention. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just joking around. Maybe I was reading into it too much. But before I could calm myself, Emily leaned in, and in front of everyone, in front of me, she kissed him. Her hands cradled his face like she'd forgotten where she was, like the room full of people watching didn't exist. And Nick. He didn't stop her. He didn't pull away. He leaned into it, his smirk twisting into something that made my blood boil. I froze. It was like the air had been punched from my lungs. The noise of the party faded, everything slowing to a crawl as I stared at them, my wife and my brother, tangled together as if I didn't exist. For a moment, I thought, maybe she thinks it's me. Maybe, just for a second, she got confused because Nick and I look so much alike. But I knew that wasn't it. The laughter, the way she touched him, it wasn't a mistake. Suddenly, every little thing I'd ignored over the last few months came flooding back. The secretive texts. The late nights working overtime. The cold distance between us at home, the way she turned away when I reached for her. I'd known something was wrong, but I'd buried it, convincing myself I was overthinking. Now I couldn't deny it. I should have stormed over right then. I should have grabbed Nick, dragged him outside, and demanded answers. But my body refused to move. My brain screamed at me to do something, but all I could do was stand there, watching them laugh when Emily finally pulled away. And what she did next shattered me. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look like someone who had just made a mistake. No, Emily laughed. A smug, satisfied laugh that rang louder than the music. Like she knew exactly what she was doing, and she wanted me to see it. Nick caught sight of me first. His smirk faltered for half a second when he realized I was watching. But then it came back, sharper, more arrogant, like he was daring me to react. Emily hadn't even noticed me yet. She was too caught up in whatever game the two of them were playing. And when I finally pushed through the crowd to stand in front of them, my voice, shaking with disbelief and rage, broke the silence. What the hell is going on? The room fell quiet. Conversations died. All eyes turned to us. Emily's head whipped around, and her smile faded the moment she saw my face. But she didn't look scared or ashamed. Instead, she rolled her eyes like I was the one making a scene. "What's your problem, Jake?" she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "It's just a kiss." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Just a kiss. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears I could barely hear the murmurs rippling through the room. Just a kiss. My wife had kissed my brother in front of me, laughed about it, and now she had the audacity to act like I was the one out of line. I glanced at Nick, hoping for something, anything, that would make sense of this. An apology, regret, even guilt. But he just stood there, leaning casually against the wall like he wasn't part of the destruction unfolding in front of us. His smirk was gone, replaced by something smug, almost triumphant, like he was enjoying the way this was playing out. "Come on, man," Nick finally said, his tone light, like he was explaining away a spilled drink. "Relax. She thought I was you. Honest mistake, right?" "An honest mistake," I repeated, my voice rising. The room felt like it was closing in on me, people inching back but refusing to look away. I pointed a trembling finger at him, then at Emily. "You expect me to believe that?" Emily scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest, her posture full of contempt. "Oh, for God's sake, Jake. Stop being so dramatic. Twins, remember? I thought it was you." Her tone, the way she said it so casually, was like a knife twisting in my gut. She wasn't trying to explain herself. She was mocking me, treating my pain like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. My hands curled into fists at my sides, every muscle in my body screaming for me to act, to do something, anything, to end this moment. "You're lying," I said quietly, my voice shaking with the effort to contain the anger boiling inside me. "You knew exactly who you were kissing." Nick shrugged, like he couldn't be bothered to care. "You're overthinking this, Jake. Seriously. It's not a big deal." A low, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Not a big deal. My wife just kissed my brother, and they were acting like I was the one with the problem." I looked at the two of them, Emily's condescending smirk, Nick's casual indifference, and something inside me snapped. "Are you two out of your minds?" I shouted. The words echoed through the silent room. I didn't care anymore. Let everyone see this train wreck. Let them watch the pieces of my life come crashing down. "You kissed my brother, Emily. In front of me. And you," I turned to Nick, my vision blurring with rage, "you let her. You didn't push her away. You let this happen." Emily rolled her eyes again, and that dismissive look on her face sent me over the edge. "Jake, it didn't mean anything. Jesus, you act like I slept with him or something. It was just a kiss." "Just a kiss," I repeated, my voice low and sharp. "Don't you dare downplay this, Emily. You think this is normal? You think this is okay?" Nick took a step forward, his voice calm but condescending, like he was dealing with a child. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be, Jake. Chill out. Chill out." I spat, my anger bubbling over. My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You want me to chill out after you let my wife put her hands on you? What the hell is wrong with you?" Nick smirked again, that same smug expression that made my blood boil. "Maybe if you weren't so uptight, this wouldn't have happened. That was it." I lunged at him before I could stop myself, grabbing the front of his shirt and shoving him backward into the wall. Gasps filled the room as the crowd stepped even further back, but I didn't care. My vision narrowed, and all I could see was Nick's infuriating face, his smug grin finally faltering. "Don't you ever talk to me like that again," I growled, my voice low and full of rage. "You don't get to justify this. You don't get to act like this is my fault." Nick's hands came up, his eyes wide with something close to fear. "All right, man, calm down. I'm sorry, okay? Jake." Emily's sharp voice cut through the haze of anger. I turned to look at her, still holding Nick by the shirt, and her face twisted in disgust. "What the hell is wrong with you? You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," I shouted, releasing Nick with a shove. "You kissed my brother, and I'm the problem here?" "Maybe you are," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. You're so wrapped up in your own little perfect world that you can't even see how miserable I've been. You don't notice anything, Jake. This," she gestured between herself and Nick, "this didn't just happen. Maybe if you paid attention for once, you'd understand why I needed something different." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My anger turned cold, like ice spreading through my veins. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built my life with, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "Needed something different?" I said quietly, my voice shaking. "What are you saying, Emily? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated. For a split second, I saw the truth flash in her eyes, something she was trying to hide. Then she shrugged, her expression hardening again. "Does it matter? I'm telling you now. I'm done pretending everything is fine." The room felt like it was spinning. The betrayal, the lies, the coldness in her voice, it was too much. I looked back at Nick, who was still leaning against the wall, rubbing his shoulder like I'd hurt him. He didn't look sorry. Not even a little. "You knew about this," I said to him, my voice low and raw. "You knew she was pulling away from me, and you let this happen. You're my brother, Nick. My brother. How could you do this to me?" Nick looked away, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. But he didn't need to say anything. His silence told me everything I needed to know. The party had come to a complete stop. People were staring, whispering to one another, but I didn't care. Let them see this. Let them see the reality of what had been happening behind my back. I turned back to Emily, my voice trembling but steady. "You're unbelievable. After everything we've been through, this is how it ends? You throw it all away for this?" She stared at me, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "Maybe it was already over, Jake. You just didn't notice." Her words cut me to the bone. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't look at either of them. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, pushing through the crowd and out the front door. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, but it did nothing to clear the storm raging inside me. My mind spun with everything I'd just heard, everything I'd seen. Emily's words, Nick's smug grin, that kiss. I stumbled down the steps and onto the sidewalk, every breath shaky and uneven. My fists were still clenched, my body trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had my life, my marriage, my family, fallen apart so completely in the span of a single night? And the worst part? I didn't even know what to do next. I don't know how long I stood outside Jason's house, breathing in the cold night air, trying to keep from falling apart. My hands were shaking, my fists still clenched like I was waiting to throw another punch that never came. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of the party, laughter and music swirling together like none of what had just happened even mattered. My wife kissed my brother in front of me, humiliated me, and the world just kept spinning. I started walking. Away from the party, away from the house where my life had cracked open. There was no destination. I just needed to move, to breathe, to escape the anger and betrayal twisting inside me. My thoughts raced, the images from inside replaying like a broken film reel. Emily's smug laugh, Nick's grin, their faces unapologetic, unashamed. I couldn't stop seeing it. The sound of footsteps behind me pulled me out of my thoughts. At first, I ignored it. I didn't want to talk to anyone. But the steps got closer. "Jake." "Hey, wait." It was Nick. Of course it was. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and turned to face him. He was jogging to catch up, still wearing that casual attitude like this wasn't the worst night of my life. He slowed as he reached me, hands up like he was trying to defuse a fight that hadn't even started yet. "Jake, man. You need to calm down." The words sent a fresh wave of anger through me. My jaw clenched as I glared at him. Calm down? He was telling me to calm down? Are you serious? I growled. You've got the nerve to follow me out here and tell me to calm down? Nick sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know you're pissed. I cut him off, stepping toward him. You think pissed covers what I'm feeling right now? You let my wife kiss you, Nick. You didn't stop her. You just stood there like it was nothing. It was nothing, Nick shot back, his tone sharper now. Jesus, Jake. She kissed me, Yeah, but it didn't mean anything. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Out of proportion, I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. I took another step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone, our friends, and now you're telling me it's not a big deal? Nick scoffed, his expression shifting to something colder. You know what your problem is, Jake? You act like everything's so perfect all the time. Like you've got it all figured out. Your job, your marriage, your life. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just trying to get by. You ever think maybe that's why Emily's so miserable? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, my hands shaking at my sides as I stared at him. What did you just say? Nick didn't back down. He crossed his arms, his face twisting with bitterness. You heard me. Maybe if you weren't so boring, so predictable, she wouldn't have come to me. Maybe she wanted someone who actually knew how to make her feel alive for once. That was it. Something inside me snapped, and before I could stop myself, my fist connected with his jaw. The sound echoed through the empty street, sharp and brutal. Nick staggered backward, stumbling before catching himself, his hand flying to his face where I'd hit him. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and something close to fear. You son of a bitch, I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You want to blame me for this? You think this is my fault? I gave everything to Emily. I built a life for her. For us. And you, I pointed a trembling finger at him, you took all of that and pissed on it just because you couldn't stand to see me happy. Nick straightened, his expression hardening. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but he didn't wipe it away. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here, Jake. Emily didn't want you anymore, okay? She's been miserable for months. And deep down you know it. Don't you dare speak for her, I snapped, my fists clenching again. You're just a jealous coward, Nick. You always have been. You've spent your whole life screwing up, and now you want to drag me down with you because you can't stand that I got something you didn't. He didn't respond. He just stood there, breathing heavily, glaring at me like I was the one who had crossed the line. For a long moment, neither of us moved, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. Finally, I turned away, my breath ragged and uneven as I forced myself to calm down. I couldn't stand the sight of him anymore. I couldn't stand the sound of his voice, the smug arrogance that still clung to him even after everything he'd done. I'm done, I said quietly, my back still to him. You're not my brother anymore. Don't call me, don't text me. Stay the hell away from me and my life. Jake. Shut up, Nick, I snapped, spinning to glare at him one last time. You don't get to talk your way out of this. Not this time. He didn't argue. For once, he had nothing to say. He just stood there, watching as I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone under the cold glow of the streetlights. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I don't remember driving home. My mind was spinning, replaying the fight over and over again, the sound of my fist hitting Nick's jaw, the look on his face when I walked away. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Emily's car was still there. My stomach twisted at the sight of it, but I forced myself to go inside. The house was dark, quiet, too still. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with a half-empty glass of wine. She didn't even look surprised when she saw me. How'd it go with Nick? She asked, her voice casual, almost bored. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. How'd it go? Like this was just some petty argument between friends. Are you serious right now? I said, my voice low and unsteady. Emily sighed, rolling her eyes. Jake, can we just stop? I'm tired. You're blowing this whole thing out of proportion. There it is again, I said bitterly, stepping closer. That same line. Out of proportion. Is that what you tell yourself? That it's not a big deal? That none of this matters? She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes cold and unfeeling. How long? I asked quietly, my voice shaking. How long has this been going on? Emily took another sip of wine, then set the glass down with a shrug. Does it matter? Tonight was the first time with Nick, if that's what you're asking. But, she trailed off, her expression unreadable. You're not stupid, Jake. You had to have known something was wrong. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. So there's someone else? Emily didn't answer right away. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. It doesn't matter who, she said finally. The point is, I'm done pretending. I'm done with this life, with you. I've been miserable for months, and you didn't even notice. Her words hit me harder than any punch could. I stared at her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, and felt nothing but cold, hollow disbelief. You're unbelievable, I whispered, my voice broken. I gave you everything, Emily. I built this life for us, and you threw it away like it meant nothing. She shrugged. Maybe it never meant as much to me as it did to you. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to someone who's so willing to tear you apart, to leave you bleeding without a second thought? I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the weight of her betrayal crushing me with every step. I'll send the divorce papers, I said quietly, my back to her. Her response was silence. I don't know how long I drove that night. Hours, maybe. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. My mind was a wreck, Emily's words, Nick's smug face, the memories of what my life used to be swirling together into one chaotic mess. I kept replaying the night, trying to find the exact moment everything went wrong. Was it months ago? Years ago? Or had it always been like this, and I just couldn't see it? The answer didn't matter anymore. When the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I found myself parked in front of my parents' old cabin by the lake. I didn't even remember deciding to drive here, but the place looked the same as always. Weathered wood, cracked windows, a porch covered in leaves. This was where Nick and I had spent every summer as kids, back when life was simple, when being brothers still meant something. Now it felt like the ghost of a place I didn't recognize, much like everything else in my life. I stepped out of the car, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The stillness was unnerving at first, so different from the chaos in my head, but I welcomed it. I needed the quiet. I grabbed a blanket from the trunk and sat down on the old porch steps, staring out at the lake. The water was calm, undisturbed, like it hadn't noticed the disaster I just walked out of. That's when the weight of everything finally hit me. Emily was gone. Not physically, but emotionally, she had left our marriage long before tonight. I just hadn't seen it, or maybe I didn't want to. I had built my life around her, trusting that what we had was real, only to realize it had been falling apart for a long time. The late nights, the distance, the emptiness in her words, it had all been leading to this moment. And Nick, my brother, my blood, the one person who should have stood by me had torn me down instead, all because of his own insecurities, his jealousy. Maybe I'd ignored the signs with him, too, the way he always pushed boundaries, the resentment that simmered beneath his jokes. But this, kissing Emily, standing there grinning while my life imploded, that was unforgivable. The anger came back then, sharp and familiar, but this time it didn't overwhelm me. I let it settle inside me, cold and quiet. It wasn't just rage anymore, it was resolve. Emily and Nick had taken everything from me, my trust, my peace, the life I thought I was building. But they weren't going to take me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and stared at the screen. There were missed calls, a couple of texts from Emily and one from Nick. I didn't bother opening them. I didn't need to read their excuses, their attempts to rewrite what had happened. I already knew their game. Make me the villain, twist the story so I was the one overreacting, the one who drove them to this. I wasn't playing along. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for the divorce lawyer. I'd saved it months ago during one of the countless times I had felt that something was wrong but couldn't bring myself to face it. Back then, it had seemed unthinkable, like a safety net I'd never need. Now it felt like my only lifeline. The call was short and simple. Infidelity. Irreconcilable. File as soon as possible. The lawyer assured me the paperwork would be sent over by the afternoon, and I thanked her before hanging up. It was done. The marriage was over. I sat there for a long time, staring at the lake, my thoughts finally beginning to slow. The anger was still there, but so was something else, a faint flicker of freedom. I'd spent years tied to people who didn't deserve me, giving my love, trust, and loyalty to people who threw it away like it was nothing. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Nick and Emily were part of my past now. I'd let them have each other if that's what they wanted. Whatever mess they made for themselves was their problem, not mine. I was done carrying their weight. The sun rose higher, and with it, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, I could see the outlines of a future, one that didn't include them. It wasn't clear yet, but it was mine. I would build something new, something real, something that no one could take away from me. I took out a notebook from the glove compartment and started writing, making a list of what I needed to do next. Find a new place to live. Focus on work. Reconnect with friends I'd pushed away. Small steps, but steps in the right direction. Before I left the cabin, I did one last thing. I sent a text to Nick. Just 5 words. Don't ever contact me again. I blocked his number and deleted the thread without waiting for a reply. He'd had his chance. He was no longer my brother. As for Emily, I didn't need to say anything more to her. The papers would speak for themselves. I knew she'd lash out, blame me, play the victim, but I didn't care anymore. I'd spent enough time trying to make her happy, enough time breaking my back for someone who didn't care if I was standing or drowning. I got in the car and drove away from the cabin, from the past, from the ruins of what I thought my life was. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless, but for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was finally moving forward. It would take time to rebuild. I knew that. The pain of their betrayal wasn't going to disappear overnight. There would be moments, quiet moments, where the memories would creep in, where the weight of it all would feel unbearable. But I would face it. I would face the anger, the grief, the loneliness, and I would come out stronger on the other side. Nick and Emily had burned down my life, but they hadn't broken me. I still had myself, and that was enough to start over. As I drove, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long rays of light across the road. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time, I didn't need to. The future was mine now. If you relate to this story or want to hear more about finding strength after betrayal, subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Your support means everything.